Now, the New Testament's a little more complicated because it's newer. Clement of Rome is probably the oldest surviving writings that we have outside of the Bible, from about 95 AD. And he quoted 8 books, which we currently have in our New Testament. AD 95, that's within 60 years of Jesus' death. They all had to get written and then circulated. It's amazingly fast. I mean, amazingly fast when you think about the ancient world. Ignatius of Antioch in about 115 was quoting from 7 of these books. Polycarp of Smyrna, about the same time frame, from 15 of the books of the Bible, not although those are the same. Irenaeus, 21 books of the Bible. In between the first 4, they quoted all the books of the Bible. Okay, they just were quoting different ones in their communication. Hippolytus, again, about 22 books of the New Testament. The Maturian canon has about 22 books, and then we get to the cancels in AD 332 and on, and everything kind of starts coming together. Now, they didn't always agree that they were considered scripture in these cancels, but they discussed all the books. And in fact, 3 out of the 4 early councils considered all 27 books that we have in our current Bible to be authoritative. Now, when they sent it out for vote and review, a lot of times that got knocked down. Often the group in northern Africa was the slowest to accept some of the books of the Bible, like Hebrews, 2nd and 3rd John, Revelation, but effectively by 400 or so AD, this really wasn't being contested anymore. Now, we still hear some rumblings about some of the books of the Bible. Hebrews is the one that is most commonly attacked because we don't know the author. And one of the criteria that the early councils used is it needed to have either an apostle write it or someone that had first-person relationship with an apostle to be considered authoritative in the New Testament. If you look at the New Testament books, they all are that way. The exception is Hebrews, because we don't know who wrote it. Some people think it might have been Paul. Some people think it might have been James, the brother of Jesus. We don't know, because the author does not announce himself. But the councils included Hebrews because it's consistent with all of the doctrine of Jesus. And that makes it authoritative. And it's really critical to have Hebrews in the Bible because it speaks in a way about the Old Testament that we don't always get a complete picture in the Gospels. It takes what Jesus said and puts it into words that I think we can understand. It's the same words, but when we see it kind of morphed into modern or first century Hebrew, it makes it easier for us to kind of understand what it was that Jesus was saying. So as far as the canon is concerned, it's pretty steady and has been steady for almost 2,000 years. There is usually some debate over a couple of books that have been left out. The Apocalypse of Peter is the most common one. I have not read all of it. I've done some quotes out of it. I used it in my dissertation. It has a few things that just don't quite fit with the rest of the Bible, which is the reason it has been rejected. The Apocrypha books you often hear about, and I think I have a slide on the Apocrypha here in a little bit.
There's like 4.
Oh, there's a lot of them, actually. And there's reasons why. Let me just get to it, and then we can talk through it. So, okay, that's enough of canon. Let's get into the objections themselves. So, 4 objections I want to talk about. All the mistakes in the New Testament. This is what people will say. People will say things like, all the problems in there. It's changed over time. The scribes made mistakes when they were copying it, because it was all hand copied until the printing press in 1600, right? So we have no way of knowing what the originals actually said, because we don't have the originals. And in most cases, we have maybe 20th generation documents. Those are the early ones.
Copies of the Hebrew original.
Not originals. It's still first century.
Not the original, the copies.
No, well, yeah, it's still first century. It's still first century. The early, actually, that's a bit debated. Some people will date the earliest to about 70 AD, and they'll be contested up to about 250. It doesn't really matter. And the reason it doesn't matter is the consistency conversation that we'll have in a few minutes. But the other one is the myths and legends, and this is one of the big challenges to Jesus, the historical Jesus, is that the thoughts of him changed over time, and the scribes modified what the actual Bible said with those changes, and we have to be able to kind of address that. So I want to introduce you. We're going to watch about 6 minutes and a couple other short videos of Daniel Wallace. Daniel Wallace was a center for the study of New Testament manuscripts up in Dallas. He also teaches at Dallas Theological Seminary. He is probably one of the world's experts, if not the world's expert in New Testament manuscripts. He has touched more of them than anybody that is currently breathing. And let me just...
Okay, wait, before you play.
I like Daniel Wallace. He has a way of kind of putting things in perspective. Any comments, questions?
See, I think the problem that we have in Christianity is we were taught that there's no error in the Bible.
That's how you define that is what matters.
When people define it, it's like no mistake, no, it's not including the variance. They don't talk about the variations.
Well, I mean, this room's different than most rooms. There's at least 7 languages spoken in this room. And it's too bad ID and Alfred and Russ aren't here. We'd be over 10 languages in this room. So you guys kind of understand already when they start translating language to language. Anybody that says word for word, they're just lying to you, okay? You can't translate word for word. But there are a lot of variations. Go ahead.
I was thinking of something else. The fact that in the New Testament nobody brings up the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and the fact that they don't talk about James's death leads us to believe also that all that was written before that happened, or surely.
I'm going to show you a timeline a little later, and we're talking about what J. Warner Wallace refers to as the chain of custody of the New Testament, which is an amazing way to look at things. He's talking from a detective perspective, but it's a very powerful way of looking that the evidence is really strong for the dating of the documents that most Christians believe. But variants are a big deal because it sounds bad. When you start saying that for every word in the New Testament there's 3.5 mistakes, 500,000 mistakes for 140,000 words, it sounds bad. And guys like Bart Ehrman really play that up. They make, I mean, he wrote a whole book called Misquoting Jesus, where effectively he played that game until he was questioned in an interview, and he said exactly what Daniel Wallace said. No core tenets of Christianity are affected by a single one of those errors. So why are we talking about it, right? But you have to know that, because people, they can quote just the objection. We have to know what the evidence really looks like so you can kind of address it. And I wanted just to show a demonstration of how tough it is to translate between languages. I guess most of you already know this, but Daniel Wallace does a little thing about how you would translate John loves Mary in Greek. I'll just let him do it. Oops, did I not?
So here's a question for the Greek geeks in the audience. How many ways are there to say John loves Mary in Greek? And we're talking about the numbers of variants that are totally insignificant. This is a good illustration of the kinds of things we see in the New Testament, 99.9% fit into this general category. So items to consider is how many ways are there that say John loves Mary? Well, the word order can be Mary loves John, Mary, any order you want, because it's the endings that tell you what the subject is and what the object is. And also the Greek article with proper names. We are not exactly sure why it's used. It might say the John loves the Mary or John loves the Mary. There was no indefinite article. It doesn't say a John loves the Mary. But I wrote my master's thesis on when the article does not occur. And I spent 1,200 hours on that master's thesis, went through the whole New Testament before the age of computers. That's how old I am. And then I did my doctoral dissertation on when the does occur. These two works would cure the most hopeless insomniac. And I still don't understand why the is used with proper names. It has not affected a single doctrine. And it's just never translated. So, differences in spelling as well, like the way you can say John in Greek, Ioannis or Ioannis, there are different ways to spell Mary. So here's the 8 ways you can say John loves Mary in Greek. You should write this down because it will show up on the test. So write all the Greek down. Yeah, right. 96 ways to say John loves Mary in Greek. At least that was my first stab at it. But you can also use conjunctions that are often untranslated in Greek, and they might put a slight emphasis, some of which we don't really fully grasp. So if you did that, that's right. 384 ways to say John loves Mary in Greek. I hope you appreciate this. It took me 8 hours to make those slides. And we zipped through, 60 slides in just a couple of minutes. And I realized when I got all done, there's some I missed. So these are not all the ways you can say John loves Mary in Greek. There's other legitimate word orders that I missed at the time. I think I've proved my point though. Then there's a periphrastic construction for loves that doubles all of this to now over 1,000. I'm still using the verbal form of agape each time. We know John never becomes Peter or James. Mary is always Mary. It's always agape. But what if I use a different verb like phileo, a little bit more intimate love? That mushrooms the numbers to over 2,000 ways to say John loves Mary in Greek without any substantial difference. That's impressive, isn't it? It's impressive.
It's crazy. And that's the problem with language to language translations. And we don't always appreciate it because, we communicate usually in one language, but some languages it's really tough to go backwards. I mean, how would you know which one was meant in the Greek? If someone translated the Greek and then gave me a sentence and I translated it back into Greek, it's going to be completely different. But the key is, are you losing the message? And that is really what his point is. Is there anything lost in the translation? Is the main idea still captured? And I think in most cases you'd see that it's not. And another one that he mentioned in the earlier video is this idea of the deity of Christ. Now I want to, you guys know the Da Vinci Code, right? Dan Brown's pseudo. True story. Yeah, his pseudo history. How's that? I'll let Daniel address that. Let's see.
What theological beliefs depend on textually suspect passages? Well, we come back to that great scholar, Dan Brown, and he has Sir Lee Teabing tell Sophie in France about the Council of Nicaea in AD 325 when Constantine allegedly declared that Jesus is God, and this is the first time it came about. My dear, he declared, until that moment in history, Jesus was viewed by his followers as a mortal prophet, a great and powerful man, but a man nonetheless, a mortal. Well, he's saying that Constantine invented the deity of Christ, and I have seen plenty of skeptical apologist books that make this very same claim, like that Muslim. An ounce of evidence is worth a pound of presumption. This is much more than an ounce of evidence. It's papyrus number 66. It's about 125 years older than that Council of Nicaea. And that Council of Nicaea, Constantine did not make up the deity of Christ. They were simply trying to define what they already believed in words that could be put into a confession. This manuscript has almost all of John in it, and this is the very first page, 125 years before the Council of Nicaea. And so what it says in John 1:1 is certainly going to be quite different from what we have later, because Constantine invented the deity of Christ. So read along with me if you would. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You don't have that in your Bibles, do you? Of course you do. Every Bible says that. It might say it in slightly different words, like what God was, the Word was. I love that translation. But every single manuscript of John's Gospel, no matter the date, no matter the language, says virtually the same thing in John 1:1. Jesus is unequivocally called God. And the same could be said about the major passages that affirm his deity, virgin birth, sinlessness, death on a cross, his bodily resurrection, second coming, and on, and not a single variant contradicts this. That's powerful. The confessions that were made in the 16th century are based on different variants. They're representing Bibles that had different variants, about 5,000 variants from what we have today. But none of them rises to the significance of affecting any doctrine. Isn't that amazing? We do have you'd almost think maybe somebody's behind the scenes preserving the word somehow, even with all these mistakes. Question 4, has the essence of the Christian faith been corrupted by the scribes? Well, I'll conclude with this. 80 years ago, Sir Frederick Kenyon, who was a paleographer extraordinaire and the principal librarian at the British Museum, was studying. He's the one who discovered that first manuscript, or first published about it, that I put on the very first screen. He said, the general result of all these discoveries and all this study is to strengthen the proof of the authenticity of the scriptures and our conviction that we have in our hands, in substantial integrity, the veritable Word of God.
One of the things he does at his center is they take high-resolution images of all these ancient papyri. You can go online and see it. Not that I can read it, obviously. If you think about how it was written and what it was written on, it's amazing that there aren't any more smudges than there are. And a lot of times, a couple of drips of ink can change what the word is. And I don't know that we appreciate it very much because we're so used to our typeset languages. And so when you hear all these mistakes, it's look at that. Yeah. And this is, like I said, this is the first chapter of John. And Hebrew is not a lot better. That's what Hebrew looks like. The wrong dot or dash, and all of a sudden you have a different word. And there's no spaces, there's no capitalization, there's no punctuation. This is from Isaiah. I can't remember which part of Isaiah, but I'm very impressed when I look at this that someone can decipher this.
No wonder the eunuch needed help reading Isaiah.
No kidding, exactly. I mean, the scholarship of the Bible is amazing. It really is. And the fact that there is so much agreement, considering this is what they're working on, actually speaks volumes to the consistency of Bible scholarship over millennium now, as well as the reproduction of the documents was very consistent. I mean, if I tried to copy that, it wouldn't look anything like that. So I want to just give you guys a little bit of taste of what this is Daniel Wallace's website for the center. And it has both printed books and manuscripts. Printed books are things like the Textus Receptus. The one I'm going to show is Erasmus's first book, which was the parallel of the Greek and the Latin Vulgate. he got in a lot of trouble for doing this, but it's amazing to see. This is a copy of his original. It's a second generation document. Isn't that beautiful? So that's the Greek, and then on the right is, and this is the first chapter of Matthew is what I'm showing.
That's pretty cool.
It's interesting that by this time, Erasmus's Greek has capital letters. The original Greek that the Bible is written in didn't have any capitalization. So he's added capitalization to stress when it's thought to be a proper name. You can see it's, when it's Abraham, there's Abraham, right? So it's, if you're interested, you can actually see these documents online, and there's so many of them.
So that's Greek?
That's Greek on the left and Latin on the right. And Erasmus was the first to do this. It was the first time that people could see what Jerome had done in developing the Latin Vulgate versus the Greek, which was a very amazing scholarly activity. Now,
Latin is the basis of all languages.
English, Romantic languages,
Romantic,
right? Spanish,
Portuguese.
English. Well, German is a little.
Germanic.
Yeah. So it's but they're obviously all the European languages kind of have a little bit of a morphing together. But it
That Latin looks a lot like German too.
it does.
Yeah, because when Vanessa was in school, she had to learn Latin because they said it's the basis of all languages. She was in
That's right.
Latin gymnasium in Germany.
Oh, definitely. Well, and if you think about it, this is Erasmus. I think is around 1382 or something like that. So obviously, Europe was the societies in Europe were communicating quite readily by the 1400s. You can also go, and see the papyri that are there. So I'm going to click on the Gospels, and you can see the list, and it tells you, what they're dated to, roughly.
And it's manuscripts.
This is, you go to CS NTM. He says CS for C.S. Lewis NTM, right? So
Is that Dead Sea Scrolls?
this is Dead Sea Scrolls. This is Gospel of John again, I think chapter 16. It's a section about this big. We always think Dead Sea Scrolls is all these,
Yeah, no.
it's fragments. There are a few really nice ones, but most of them are fragments like this. But, how amazing are the people that can look at that and then match it to...
Here it belongs to this page.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm going to show another one, I think. I should have picked P66, but I was trying to give you guys just a taste of what's available. And these are very conservative datings. A lot of the scholars would put them maybe 50 or 100 years earlier than what he's reflecting, but he's trying to be as conservative as possible because, scholars. So just anything that's 2nd century or sooner, you can see there's just so many. There's P66, and then... But again, these resources are available. And so if someone says, we don't have originals, it's like, yeah, but come look at what we do have. These are ancient documents. And I don't think people recognize that we have ancient copies of what we call our Bible, far more reliable than any other ancient document. And like Daniel Wallace said, if we use the same standard that people try to put on the Bible for other documents, we wouldn't know anything about history.
That's true.
We accept history. And in fact, when we talk about the historical evidence for Jesus, I'll talk about the fact there are more non-Bible references to Jesus than there are any of the Caesars during his lifetime. These are the rulers of the world, and like Augustus has like 6 independent manuscripts earlier than the 2nd century. Jesus is like 30. These are non-Bible. These are non-Bible this obscure carpenter from a little podunk town in Galilee is more recorded in history than the ruler of the world. That tells you something. Like I said, the history is amazing. That's what gives us so much support for what it is that we believe. It might be a good place to take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about how we can substantiate when the Bible was actually written.